MarkRogersTV back with you again as we continue to break down every Power 5 conference schedule in America leading up to opening night on Thursday, August 28th. We're in the midst of the Big 12. We stop at Oklahoma State, but before we dive in on the Cowboys, let's consider one thing, and that's that the Big 12 has 10 teams. It's the Big 12, but they've got 10 teams because of expansion elsewhere. Actually, the Big 12 does it right. They've got a 9-game conference schedule with 10 teams. Therefore, everybody plays everybody. So that's less analysis for me. Even though there's one more conference game, this is the reason why. In the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC, they've got 14 teams playing 8 conference games. Doesn't make sense. They miss 5 opponents. So those missed opponents, those differences in schedule are huge. They're enormous. They need to be analyzed and broken down, because some teams play much more difficult schedules than other teams based on last year's results. In the Big 12, again, they didn't want it this way, but they kind of fell into the perfect schedule. They don't have a championship game because they don't have 12 teams, but they do have 10 teams and a 9-game conference schedule. Therefore, nobody has a gripe. And I don't have much analysis on the conference schedule because everybody plays everybody. Now, because of the uneven number of games, the odd number of games within the conference, they do have a discrepancy with home and away totals there. So that provides a slight, very slight advantage for some schools playing 5 conference games at home versus 4 for others, but it doesn't even come close to comparing with teams, let's say, in the ACC that have to play Clemson and Florida State, while teams in the same division play Wake Forest and Boston College. Makes no sense whatsoever. All right, on to Oklahoma State. Let's look at the non-conference slate that is completely legitimized by playing Florida State. That's all there is to it. They only have the 3 non-conference games, again, as opposed to the 4 in the Big 10, the ACC, and the SEC. Only 3 non-conference games, and Oklahoma State doesn't play anybody else. They've got Missouri State and Texas San Antonio. But again, for Oklahoma State, legitimized solely by the Florida State game. And rightfully so. That game played on opening night, August 30th, that Saturday night at Texas Stadium, or whatever they call that, Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, Texas, Jerry's World, there against Florida State. Would have loved to have seen this game played last season when Oklahoma State had more experience and more talent on defense, more playmakers on defense, starting with Justin Gilbert at cornerback. But they lost a slew of all-conference performers in the front 7. Would have loved to have seen that defense take on Florida State. I'm not saying that they would have been extremely competitive, but Oklahoma State did have one of the top 12 or 15 teams in the country. All their losses were very solid losses, if there is such a thing. They did take Baylor to the cleaners, and again, barely lost to a Missouri team that went to the SEC championship game and put up 42 on Auburn. So that would have been a great game last year. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a great game this year. J.W. Walsh at quarterback for Oklahoma State, most likely beating out the freshman Rudolph. And so that's the situation. Florida State, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State can just go out there and let it all hang out, see where they measure up against probably the best team in college football. Okay, the other 2 non-conference games, again, Missouri State and Texas San Antonio. So unless things go drastically wrong, Oklahoma State's 2-1 going into conference play. Okay, this is where it gets somewhat interesting in conference play, even though, again, everybody's got the same schedule. So little analysis there, except Oklahoma State has it front-loaded at home. They play 4 of their first 5 games at Boone Pickens Stadium. Then after that, they've got a rough stretch of playing 5 of 7 on the road, and most of the contenders in the Big 12 outside of Stillwater. So this is it. Texas Tech in a huge opener in the Big 12 at home, and then Iowa State. So the Cowboys should be 2-0, but Texas Tech, that's probably a 60-40, 70-30 proposition in the Cowboys' favor against Texas Tech at home, and then they take on Iowa State at home. So they could be 2-0 non-conference, most likely will be 2-0 in the conference, and probably 2-1 outside of the conference. I'm used to spitting out 4-game totals non-conference. So then the rough stretch begins. Okay, not necessarily with Kansas the next week on the road at Lawrence, but again, 5 of the final 7 games on the road for Oklahoma State as they go to TCU. They got West Virginia at home. Then the rough stretch at the end, the fight to the finish at Kansas State, Texas at home, at Baylor, at Oklahoma. So the good thing for Oklahoma State is if they desire to win a conference championship, which of course is the goal there, they've got to a position in college football where Oklahoma State should be vying for Big 12 championships year in, year out, even on what could be a bit of a rebuilding year for the Cowboys. You want the big games at the end. You don't necessarily want them in Waco and Norman, but at the same time, if they're able to hold serve and do what we expect them to do, and that possibly could be, let's say, 6-1 in the Big 12 with 2 games left. They've got Baylor and they've got Oklahoma, so they will have a championship right there for the taking if they can pull off a couple upsets on the road, what we would expect at this point to be upsets at Baylor and Oklahoma. So again, the key points for Oklahoma State here is they most likely lose to Florida State, and they measure themselves. Did we give them a fight? Did we lose by 10? Or did we get blown out 52-17? That could be the outcome for Oklahoma State against Florida State in the opener. So it's a measuring stick game with about a 5% chance of victory. That would be enormous, of course, and should vault them immediately past Florida State in the polls. I don't believe in this. Florida State's number 1. They lose. They only drop to 7. And Oklahoma State beats Florida State on a neutral site, and they jump into the top 25 at number 14. Makes no sense. They should vault way past Florida State if they can somehow win that football game. But again, let's expect the chalk. They win 2 of 3 non-conference. Then they step into conference play, and they've got an easy early slate with Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Kansas. TCU not so much, and West Virginia. Then finish with a difficult stretch. Again, Kansas State, Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma with 3 of those 4 games on the road. Oklahoma State, I would expect a 6-3 record in conference play, and I think that would be doing some business there. The loss to Florida State makes them 8-4. So that's the unofficial prediction right here. First, would love to hear from Oklahoma State fans. Chime in on this schedule. The only imperfection in the Big 12 schedule is they have 9 teams in the conference other than the team you're talking about. So you've got 9 games. You got to split up 5-4 on the road, but by far not even close. Respect the Big 12 for this. And again, they kind of defaulted into it that they play the best conference schedule in college football, the most legitimate conference schedule in college football. I will debate that with anyone. It's not even an argument, really. They play everyone. That legitimizes the Big 12. When, in the view of a lot of national media pundits, they disrespect and discredit the schedule that the Big 12 plays because there's no championship game. And I love conference championship games, but everybody plays everybody in the Big 12. So they've already played the conference championship in the schedule when everybody plays everybody. All right, let's talk about it right here on Mark Rogers TV.